In the mountain village of Ogimi in Okinawa Prefecture, researchers conducting a population study in the 1990s found something they could not immediately explain. Women over 65 were not simply living longer than almost anywhere else on the planet. They were presenting with skin elasticity measurements closer to women 2 decades younger, not one or two outliers, a pattern consistent enough to reappear in the data across multiple years of fieldwork. That is the number that tends to stop people. Not the longevity statistic, we have all heard that one, the elasticity data, the structural quality of the tissue, because living long and aging slowly are not the same thing. And somewhere in that gap is a question that nobody in the American beauty industry has any financial interest in answering honestly. This channel exists for women who already suspect that. Women who have stood in front of a bathroom mirror holding a jar of something that cost $80 and thought, this is not working. And I think I have always known it would not work. If that is you, stay here. What follows is not a product recommendation, it is a record. The first thing to understand about Japanese women and aging is that they are not trying to stop it. This is not a semantic point. It is the foundational difference between what they do and what the American beauty industry has spent a century selling you. The industry sells you the idea of reversal, erase, restore, turn back. Japanese women in Okinawa, in the traditional districts of Kyoto, and in the rural communities of Nagano operate inside a completely different framework. The word they use most often in relation to skin after 60 is not youthful. It is something closer to settled or earned. The skin is not a problem to be solved. It is a surface that reflects how you have lived, and the goal after 60 is to let it reflect that honestly while keeping the tissue underneath healthy enough to carry you another 30 years. That shift in orientation is not cosmetic, it is biological. And it turns out it has measurable consequences for the skin itself. When you are no longer fighting your face, you stop doing several things that quietly damage it. You stop scrubbing. You stop layering products that create microinflammation. You stop reaching for the brightening serum every morning because you have decided that a little pigmentation is not a defeat. The skin's barrier function, its outermost layer of lipids and proteins that keeps moisture in and irritants out, has a chance to stabilize. Chronic low-grade inflammation, which dermatologists increasingly identify as one of the primary drivers of visible skin aging, begins to quiet. The tissue underneath starts to behave differently because you have stopped telling it every day that it is broken. This is not a metaphor. Inflammation biomarkers in skin tissue respond to what you apply to the surface. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Investigative Dermatology confirmed measurable inflammatory responses from common skincare ingredients in aging skin that were significantly less pronounced when those ingredients removed. The skin's recovery capacity at 65 is not zero, it is suppressed. There is a difference. The practices I am describing come from the daily lives of women in Okinawa Prefecture, the traditional districts of Kyoto, and the rural communities of Nagano, places where these methods have never been replaced by anything modern because nothing modern has proven worth the trade. What makes these communities useful to document is not that they are exotic, it is that they are continuous. The chain of practice has not been broken by a marketing trend or a regulatory fashion. What a woman in her 70s does with her skin in Ogimi today is structurally related to what her grandmother did and her grandmother's mother before her. You cannot say that about anything sold at a department store counter. The core of what they do is surprisingly small in volume and surprisingly old in origin. Fermented rice bran called Nuka in Japanese has been used in skincare and bathing practice since the Edo period, which began in the early 17th century. Women who worked in the silk and dye trades in Kyoto noticed generations ago that their hands, which should have been roughened by the work, stayed notably soft. The connection traced back to the nuka they used in bathing. What they were observing, without the vocabulary for it, was the effect of the natural ceramides, ferulic acid, and enzyme activity released through fermentation. Fermentation does something specific. It breaks down the rice bran's molecular structure into compounds small enough to interact with the skin's surface layers rather than sitting on top of them. It is not a modern discovery dressed in Japanese aesthetics for the export market. It is 400 years of consistent empirical observation compressed into a practice. Here is a woman who gives you some sense of what that continuity looks like in practice. She is 72 years old. She lives outside Kyoto, near enough to the old dye district that her grandmother was a fabric worker. She spent 35 years as a licensed pharmacist before retiring, which means she is not naive about claims. She reads labels the way a professional reads them, and she describes the cosmetics industry with a polite contempt that pharmacists often develop from watching patients spend money on things that do not work. She has 3 daughters, all of whom she is slowly converting. For the past 11 years, her daily skincare cost has averaged less than $8 a month. She uses fermented rice bran, a simple camellia oil pressed locally, and green tea water that she makes herself every morning. She said in a translated interview something that I have not been able to stop thinking about. My mother looked like my mother at 70. I look like her. I think that is the right outcome. Not a boast, an observation. The inheritance she was describing was not a product, it was a practice that was never interrupted. Camellia oil is the second anchor of what these women do. In Kyoto and along the coasts of Nagasaki and Kagoshima, Camellia tsubaki has been used in hair and skincare for centuries. The reason it persists is not tradition for tradition's sake. The oleic acid content of camellia oil is structurally similar to the sebum the skin produces naturally, which means aging skin, which produces significantly less of its own sebum than younger skin, absorbs it without the inflammatory response that many synthetic moisturizers trigger. It does not clog, it does not sit, it integrates. Women in their 60s and 70s using it consistently describe the same thing. Not that their skin looks dramatically different, but that it has stopped fighting them, that it feels like it belongs to them again. Now, let us talk about why you were never told any of this in a way that was actionable. In 1976, a panel called the Cosmetic Ingredient Review was established in the United States. It sounds like a regulatory body. It is not. It is funded by the Personal Care Products Council, which is the industry's own trade association. It reviews cosmetic ingredients and publishes safety assessments, but it has no enforcement power. None. It is the industry evaluating the industry. The panel has reviewed over 4,000 ingredients in the decades since its founding, and its assessments inform the labels on products you buy today, even though no government agency is required to act on them. The FDA did not substantially update its cosmetic regulation framework between 1938 and 2022, 84 years. The law governing what goes on your face was written the same year the ballpoint pen was invented. During those 84 years, the American cosmetics market grew into an industry generating over $50 billion annually. Synthetic fragrance, a single word on a U.S. label, can legally contain hundreds of undisclosed chemical compounds because fragrance formulas are protected as trade secrets. The European Union restricted that standard in 2003. The United States, at the time of this recording, still has not matched it. This is not a conspiracy. It is a business model operating inside a regulatory vacuum that nobody with financial interest in filling it has filled. The result for women over 60 is specific and measurable. You have spent decades applying products developed, tested, and approved inside a system that profits from your continued purchasing, not from your actual skin health. The incentive to make something that works permanently is directly opposed to the incentive to sell you the next jar. Japanese women in these communities were never inside that system, not because they are morally superior, because the market never fully colonized the practice. The dye worker's granddaughter outside Kyoto does not have a brand loyalty. She has an inheritance. The third element, and in some ways the most underestimated one, is green tea. Specifically, The internal and topical use of matcha and gyakuro grades that carry high concentrations of EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate, a polyphenol compound that has been studied extensively for its anti-inflammatory and photoprotective properties. Women in Nagano and Uji, the tea growing region south of Kyoto, have consumed multiple cups daily for centuries. The topical application cooled tea water used as a rinse or compress is a secondary practice, quieter than the nuka and the camellia oil, but consistent. The photoprotective effect is not a substitute for physical sun avoidance, which these women also practice with a discipline that American sun worship culture would find difficult to understand. But the internal consumption of high-grade green tea is a biochemical input, not a ritual. The polyphenols accumulate. The effect on chronic skin inflammation over decades is not a folk belief. It is a documented mechanism. Here is what that convergence looks like from the outside. A woman who has spent 30 or 40 years consuming high-quality green tea daily, using fermented rice bran on her skin, applying a small amount of camellia oil, and staying largely out of direct sun, will present at 65 or 70 with a skin texture that looks from across the room like it belongs to someone significantly younger. Not because she reversed aging, because she created conditions where the tissue was not chronically inflamed, was not stripped of its natural oils, was not bombarded with compounds. It had to neutralize. The skin did what skin does when you leave it the right materials and do not continuously disturb it. These methods were not invented in Japan. That clarity matters. Roman women of the 1st century used olive oil and goat milk as skin preparation, and records from Pliny the Elder describe the use of rice, water, and oil-based cleansing among women of the Mediterranean court. In ancient Egypt, castor oil and honey were documented skincare preparations used continuously from the early dynastic period. Persian court medicine, codified in Ibn Sina's 11th century canon of medicine, recommended fermented grain preparations for skin health with reasoning that reads, in translation, almost identical to what modern dermatology says about barrier repair. Ayurvedic tradition used sesame and specific plant oils in ways that map closely onto what camellia oil achieves: structurally deep penetration, low inflammatory profile, compatibility with natural sebum. Korean women in Joseon-era court records describe layered application of botanical water preparations in a sequence that anticipates what is now marketed badly and expensively as the multi-step K-beauty routine. Japanese women did not discover these things. They simply never stopped using them. The distinction is not minor. Preserved knowledge and invented knowledge are different in kind. Preserved knowledge has survived the test of continuous use across generations, including generations that had every reason to abandon it if it failed. The fact that it was not abandoned is itself evidence. What Japanese women after 60 understand, and what the pharmacist outside Kyoto was pointing at when she said she looked like her mother, is that the goal is continuity, not intervention. The skin you have at 72 is the skin you have been building since your 40s. The choice is compound. This is not a discouraging statement, it is a clarifying one, because it means the women reading this or watching this are not starting too late. They are simply starting with their eyes open for possibly the first time, inside a framework that does not require them to buy anything to understand. The age Japanese women stop worrying about their skin is not a specific number. It is a threshold. It is the moment, and different women reach it at different points, when they stop measuring their face against what it was at 30 and start asking a different question entirely. Not, how do I look younger? But, what does this skin need to stay healthy for another 30 years? That question has answers. The answers are not expensive. They are, in almost every case, the same answers that women in Okinawa and Kyoto and the mountain communities of Nagano have been arriving at for 4 centuries. You already know more than the counter will ever tell you. The question is whether what you have seen here lines up with something you suspected before you clicked. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, city, state, region, and whether you have ever noticed a woman in your own life older than 60 whose skin made you stop and think, how is that possible? Not because she looked young, because she looked right. We want to know who those women were to you. And if your mother or grandmother had a practice she never called skincare, something she did in the morning or the evening that nobody around her did, name it. We collect those. They deserve to be written down. If you are the kind of woman who believes real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do. In the next video, the specific decision made by one of the world's largest synthetic fragrance manufacturers in 1988, named, documented, with the internal market research that drove it, that placed a compound into an estimated 40% of American women's daily moisturizers, a compound the manufacturer's own scientists had flagged 3 years earlier. The date is in the record. The company still exists. That one is coming.